On Dantooine, there's a cave that contains a large outcropping of kyber crystals. When you approach them, Kreia chimes in with information.
Your thoughts are disturbed. I can feel them from a great distance, like a shiver running through you.
Echoes. I feel echoes of the Force here.
This cave is Force-sensitive. I've read of places such as this.
Force-sensitive locations such as this absorb and reflect Force energy. The crystals are the catalyst here.
What she and the disciples seems to be describing is a Force Nexus, but this Force Nexus has somewhat different characteristics than what we've come to associate with a Force Nexus. For one, she points out that you can clearly see why this area became this way. The crystals are the catalyst here, she says. This part of the cave is covered in them, and they naturally absorb and reflect Force energies, thus making this area radiate with the Force, akin to a Force Nexus. Often when we think of them, we also think about whether it's a light side or a dark side Force Nexus. But don't forget that there are Force Nexuses that are just plain Force energy. This cave is an example of this. In fact, it could be that all Force Nexuses start this way, and due to circumstances it either becomes light or dark, just like with a person, but more on that later. Vizaz brings up a point that Kreia continues to elaborate on.
I sense that Revan once passed through here, leaving a strong impression behind in the crystals. Perhaps future Jedi who visit this cave will feel our presence, as if seeing our footprints preserved in the soil. The crystals here are infused with the Force. Some could be harvested and used for lightsabers. The crystals here do not drain Force energy from Jedi. They collect the excess energy that radiates from those attuned to the Force. Even mundane actions of the basest creatures can create detectable ripples in the Force. A Mynock beating its wings on the plains could cause a sandstorm in the desert, and figuratively speaking, Jedi have much bigger wings.
She's essentially describing chaos theory. Chaos theory is defined as the branch of mathematics that deals with the complex systems whose behavior is highly sensitive to slight changes in condition, so that small alterations can give rise to strikingly great consequences. In simple terms, the smallest changes in something that is highly sensitive to change can have massive, unforeseen eventualities. In the Star Wars universe, this is brought to an extreme. To people like Jedi, it's more than a theory. The entire galaxy is connected through a Force.
Every choice we make, whether we know it or not, sends echoes through the Force. It can awaken feelings, ignite passions, hate, anger, fear, where none existed before.
The Force binds all things. The slightest push, the smallest touch, sends echoes throughout life.
Most people, even in real life, go about their days never wondering what effects their actions can have in the long term. It isn't something you should do too often. You'd most likely go insane thinking of all the possibilities. But this goes back to the example on Nar Shaddaa. You may think that giving the beggar a little bit of money or scaring him away is a small thing and nothing can come of it. But we know that's not true. With Force users, it's more extreme. Pain can lead them down a dark path, resulting in a lot of people suffering because of it. But it's the same with everyone. We all have our breaking points. It could be that this guy snapped after this event, and that's not good for anybody, especially in a place full of refugees. This is true of people and even animals, but what about an entire planet? There are questions surrounding Force Nexuses that remain unanswered. The planet of Dantooine is not a Force Nexus, but this location is, because of the crystals. So the question becomes, is a catalyst always required in order to produce a Force Nexus? Something physical that the Force can attach to? These crystals are essentially the midichlorians of the cave. When it comes to entire planets that are Force sensitive, it could be crystals, something in the soil or air. That's assuming that something physical is required. If something physical isn't always required, then that means that the Force can randomly pump certain places with more energy. But more than that, can it also randomly assign one of the two aspects as well? Does a Force Nexus always originate with regular neutral Force energy? The circumstances around the Force Nexus decide whether it becomes a light side or dark side Nexus. Could the alignment be random? Force Nexuses on the dark side tend to be violent, inhospitable places, while those on the light tend to be calm, peaceful places. But take the dark side Nexus. Is it violent and inhospitable because it's a dark side Nexus? Or is it a dark side Nexus because it's violent and inhospitable? The same question, vice versa, applies to the light side one. Through investigation and conversations, I've determined that the answer is all of the above. Korriban is a dark side Force Nexus.
It is difficult to center myself here.
It can be argued that it became dark side due to its history of violence. Wikipedia says that Korriban became a dark side Force Nexus due to the long-term presence of the Sith Lords. But long before the exiled Jedi who became Lords of the Sith were present, there were many conflicts, and the Sith species was already strong in the dark side before the Dark Jedi ever arrived. The environment determines the evolutionary path of a species, and the species can also alter its own environment. The question remains, did the Sith species become strong in the dark side because the planet was turned into a dark side Nexus? Or did the planet turn into a dark side Nexus because the species became strong in the dark side? If we look at a planet like Tython, then we see that both are possible. Tython itself is a Force Nexus. It has a very high concentration of plain Force energy. It also has 2 moons, which are both Force Nexuses. Ashla, which is a light side Force Nexus, and Bogan, which is a dark side Force Nexus. As far as we know, all 3 celestial bodies have had settlers, but no native sentient species. By the time the first settlers arrived in the system, they already had these characteristics. So as far as we can tell, they were randomly and conveniently assigned into exactly what they needed to be for the rise of the Jedi Order. There is an argument that it doesn't take sentience to shift a planet. Perhaps the natural wildlife or occurrences can produce the same results. Kreia did say that.
Even mundane actions of the basest creatures can create detectable ripples in the Force.
But she went on to say that Force sensitives are the ones with the big wings. So I would find it difficult to believe that creatures who essentially do what they do for survival can be seen as either light or dark. A lion hunting a gazelle isn't malicious, at least not from the point of view of the lion, but that's what carnivorous creatures do. However, if the Force was involved in some way, then I can see it happening, and that could explain Ashla and Bogan. If that's true, then that still doesn't mean that a physical catalyst is needed to create a Force Nexus, but it does mean that the Force requires physical actions to occur in order to shift a celestial body to one aspect or another. Also, that celestial body might have to be a Force Nexus in order for the Force to have sufficient influence on the creatures to make something that significant happen. However, the Force flows through all things, every planet. A Force Nexus planet is just where Force energy is more concentrated. Could a non-Force sensitive planet also be aligned to one side or another? Could a non-Force sensitive planet be shifted to one side or another? Look at the places where the Rakatans chose to place star maps on. Dantooine, Manaan, Kashyyyk, Tatooine, and Korriban. Rakatan technology was interconnected with the Force. Could it be that they chose to build the star maps on planets that were Force Nexuses, or planet that at least had one source of strong Force energy? We know that Korriban is a Force Nexus. We know that Dantooine has at least one location that is a Force Nexus, but the rest are unaccounted for. Tatooine, according to the Tusken Raiders, used to be a lush world with oceans and a jungle spanning the entire planet. It's possible that the plant life there was Force sensitive, thus serving as the catalyst that made the planet a Force Nexus once upon a time. This ceased to be after the Rakatan bombardment, but if this was the case, then it would be highly unusual for the native Kumumga species to have remained unaffected by the strong Force energies. Kashyyyk is currently still a world covered in forest, and there's even been suggestions that the Wookiee are genetically engineered beings by the Rakata. But the flora and fauna of the planet does not contain any force sensitivity. The Wookiees, like most other sentient beings, mostly lean to the center in force alignment, and are also not usually force sensitive. But since the Rakatan technology is infused with the force, and they were using agricultural machines on the planet, perhaps they decided the world was suitable for a star map after all. Then there's Manan, and the giant Faraxan shark known as the Progenitor might be force sensitive. However, it swims around the star map, Rakatan technology, which means the shark may have only evolved into this due to its proximity to the star map. Or, like possibly with the Wookiees, the Rakata purposefully mutated the shark into being force sensitive for star map related purposes. Of course, this is all speculation, but the questions were, could a non-force sensitive planet also be aligned to one side or another? And could a non-force sensitive planet be shifted to one side or another? I'd have to say no across the board. With the amount of dark side energy the Rakatan were putting out, Rakata Prime is looking awfully lush and balanced. You could say that it realigned into balance due to the presence of the dark and light Rakata, but still, to not have even a trace left? The Jedi built their temple on Coruscant on top of a Sith shrine, and all that light side energy still couldn't extinguish its dark side radiation. If non-force sensitive planets could be realigned, and a violent wildlife was enough to turn it dark, then Kashyyyk and Onderon would be dark aligned. The Shadowlands, the jungles of Onderon, and even its moon, Duxon, aren't exactly hospitable. In the end, I have to say that it takes a force nexus to turn a location into one of the aspects of the force. If the exile went out of her way to destroy the crystals in the cave like she asked about, it's possible that she would transfer some dark side points into the cave.
That would create quite a large impression of yourself, and the crystals would eventually grow back.
But like Kreia said, they would eventually come back. Given enough time alone, they would most likely rebalance. We may never get concrete answers to the questions posed in this video, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't have some fun thinking about it. In the real world, we have the power to shape our environment into pretty much whatever form we wish, so we'd be wise to keep it hospitable.